Hi, my friends. Welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, your host, and also an indie author. I'm thrilled you're joining me today for another fun interview with a passionate author. We're going to kick off this show with an exciting reading, so let's get started.
The man gave a light cough, running a hand through his hair as he considered the scene stretched out before him. He'd kept the rich brown crop left to him fairly short since it had begun to run away from his face. As if to aid him, the wind blew wisps of smoke up from the valley below. Looking sidelong at the boy, who sat within easy reach to his right, cross-legged atop a boulder, he stifled a smirk. That same wind had done its best to knock his small hood back, though he brought a hand up to keep it in place. "Do you know their names?" The boy broke the protracted silence, no longer willing, or perhaps no longer able to simply sit in wonder, staring at the three settlements that lay smoking in the twilight valley below. His voice was respectful and soft, despite the slight scratched growl that always pervaded it. After a moment, during which only the wind spoke, he amended, "Or would it be best to ask, do you know what the names were?" The man seemed content to allow the silence to play out a little longer, which was his nature. Before too long, however, he shook his head. "No," he said. "They'll be back. All three of them will rebuild. They've been raided, not razed to the ground." "But," the boy shook his head, face pinched as he tried to understand, "but all three villages are on fire. Or at least, but lately were. They're still smoking." He was amused, as always, at the look of intense focus the boy wore. That look, coupled with the coarse, dark brown, nearly black, length of his hair, the pale green of his skin, and the small lower tusks that jutted just over his upper lip, would have combined to make him look predatory and dangerous were he older. On a boy his age, however, it looked like adorable mimicry, not aggressive malice. "What?" "Nothing," said the man. He tried to keep his voice mild, and fought down a grin with admirable success. "No, not nothing. I see the way you mark me from the side of your eye." The man's dark brows lifted for a moment, but he continued to say nothing. "Well?" "Well, what?" "Father!" His voice was a study in amused frustration. He watched his son try to maintain his look of fierce concentration, working to turn it into one of annoyance or even anger. He suspected his son wouldn't be able to resist the fit of laughter bubbling up inside of him for much longer. He opted to help the process along. "Lacrid." He dragged the boy's name out, mimicking the way he'd said father, wrestling his normal raven's crow tones into something more playful. It turned the trick. Several bursts of laughter escaped from Lacrid. Judging by the look in his face, he hadn't so much given into laughter as he'd been ambushed by it. It was as if the act was a source of embarrassment. After each bout of giggles, he tried to regain his composure with limited success. This made each little eruption of mirth increasingly more hysterical and uncontrolled than the last. Both the laughter and the accompanying look of comical self-recrimination plastered onto the boy's face forced his father's own laughter, a single loud caw, followed by a slow, rolling baritone rumble. When the boy's hysterics subsided at last, the man finally answered his question. "All right," he said. "The peasants and serfs here built out of rough stacked stones, not wood and thatch like Yodin or Lesaloon, not wattle and daub like Gerstaloon. Raids hurt, of course, especially if there's bravery involved, as it usually means someone dies. Still, there won't have been enough damage or burning to make them give up on their settlement altogether. And stone doesn't fear fire," Lacrid mused. "So what is that burning then? What did the raiders set fire to?" He wore a transported expression. Lessons like this always seemed to draw him in. "Stone doesn't like heights. Once you take it out of the mountain's arms or pluck it up from the ground, it's always in a rush to find sculp again." He caught the boy's grin at this imagery and allowed himself a small smile of his own. His son had a hungry mind, to be sure. "So," Lacrid sounded thoughtful, "if stone's eager to fall, roofs." The triumph in his voice was evident. "They have to build their roofs out of something they could brace. Something longer. They'd use timber? Fashioned into planks?" "Just so." Lacrid seemed to draw himself up, almond eyes going to half-mast as he beamed. After a long moment of silence, he recalled his other, still unanswered question. And their names? Do you know them? This one's Zelezny Oko. There, on the left. That one's Bayevidlika. The farthest one, back and to the right, that's Borovis Pizin, or Borovis Huba. I can't recall which. Eye and eye, white fork and pine song or pine music. He pointed to each one a second time as he translated. He saw Lackwood stiffen slightly. He'd heard the footsteps too then. Keeping the same mild tone, he concluded, Coverland's mother tongue has always sounded beautiful, even when it's butchered. I don't know about that. This new voice was carried on air that sounded as if it had gusted up from a barrel chest. He'd the mouth of an outsider. It sounds more like a drunken balladeer. He rolled his R's at the end of outsider, more, and drunken. The newcomer sounded jovial enough, but there was a tone of mingled greed and authority carried along in the air. As they turned to face the owner of that voice, he put his left hand on Lackridge's right shoulder. My name's Yobum, friend. A forest of pines and yew trees loomed up as they turned, filling the world with green shadows. 4 men stood along the tree line, a dozen strides of bare rock separating them from Yobum and Lackrid. He'd expected the speaker to have a beard just slightly thicker than his accent, and he wasn't disappointed. The 4 of them were all coal-maned and bearded, pale-skinned and broad-shouldered. Hard times appeared to have made them lean beneath their furs and layered burlap clothing. My son and I were just going to set about making supper. He paused for a moment, as if considering, then shrugged his brows as if to say, what the hell's? You and yours are welcome to share our fire. We haven't a Duke's feast in tow, but we do have meat. A pair of hoppers caught this morning. I can stretch that out into a stew that should feed the lot of us. The 4 men licked their lips at his offer. They clearly weren't hunters of even a child's skill. Small game was plentiful here after all. That wasn't the only tale their body language told. They held no formation to speak of, stood in a loose and untidy clump at the edge of the makeshift campsite. Their leader, or perhaps he was only their mouthpiece, time would tell, stood with his 3 fellows more or less surrounding him, while his proximity made their collective look like a milling pack of hunting predators. Yobum suspected it was as much for their own comfort as for any such cultivated imagery. Certainly it would intimidate the average serf or peasant, but no fighting man or woman would be cowed.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. Today, we have the amazing, talented, and multi-genre Mr. JP with us. Hi, how are you today?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I am wonderful. So this is so exciting because not only are you an author, you are a musician. Your background and history is amazing.
Set the kettle. I'm talking to Crazy Cat Lady meets Breaking Bad. I'm ridiculously excited for this conversation.
Going to be a blast. I can guarantee you that. So let's start specifically with the book. We have a little special treat for everybody. So we have a narrator that is covering the reading for today. So I want you to tell us a little bit about the story, where did it came from?
This is the second book in the series. The series is The Cycle of Bones. The book is The Drums of Unrest. So with the first book, nobody knows me as an author. So I made sure that I did something short and sweet. I did a novella, very self-contained, little tiny pocket of the world, give people the taste. And of course, it led to the rest of the series. It did well enough, so I was super excited to get to the next book. And now we have this giant, monolithic, 230,000 word count book of doom. And that's The Drums of Unrest. I'm super excited. The book will have been out by now, came out 19th of November.
When you decided to put this book together, what was your inspiration for it?
The best way I can put this is the series is based in a world, like super trailer voice, in a world where blind people write fantasy novels. But the world has existed for, very clearly in my mind, for probably 20 years at this point. So I've got this massive backlog, like megs and megs of text documentation, which lays everything out for the world, all the world building stuff every sort of fantasy and sci-fi author loves to do. Because that exists, I can just be with whichever character's point of view we're hanging out with for the sake of the story. And there's this long, sweeping, epic fantasy break in the world. You don't want to start with, and it exploded. You're
So you
beginning.
could.
Well, you could. In this scenario, I feel like the best course of action was to take the characters, the people, because they're not just, words on a page if you're doing it right. They're people, as I'm sure you know. To just kind of turn the camera on with them as they move through their own lives and their own troubles, both physical and political and emotional and racial and all the other things that go into it, as the events that are already pre-programmed into the world start rearing their ugly head, and this crisis that we saw the beginning of in the first book, Dawn of Unions, kind of rolls into other parts of the country and other parts of the continent and other parts of the world. And we're starting to see these people react completely unaware of what was happening until it finally hits. Right? So the inspiration for me, I guess, comes down to, this is a story that's been so firmly in my head for so long. It's one of those things that had to get out, right? Like, you need a place to let the idea out of your head, get onto the page, get into the air. Because if it doesn't happen, you don't sleep nights, right? It just rolls around in your head and keeps you awake.
I call them your little children, and eventually they need
Yeah.
to come to the world.
Absolutely.
I got to read your bio, and I was so moved by the fact that you're a musician. You've been a musician from the time you were 5. How
Yeah,
does
pretty
that transition go from you're creating art from a whole different world to decided to put it on the page?
It's not that different, really. You'd think it would be, right? Like, even I thought it was going to be. It's all storytelling. Whether it's being a musician, writing music, singing songs, performing on stage, or it's writing an article for a paper, or it's putting together a short story or a poem or something larger like a novella or a novel. It's all about storytelling, right? At bottom, you're crafting a way to get the things, like we were just talking about, rolling around in your head out and into the world so you can sleep, right? It keeps you up at night. Stephen King famously once said, talent won't be quiet. It keeps you up. It wakes you up in the middle of the night yelling, use me, use me. And if you don't, it atrophies, but before it does, it kind of drives you crazy. I've even rolled around the music of the world in question for the books, right? So there are actual songs within the pages of the books. And of course, because I'm me, there's a soundtrack forthcoming, because why wouldn't there be, right? You might as well merge the two worlds.
If you're writing music, you might as well put it into the books. Why not? Absolutely.
Exactly.
It is all about communicating. It's all about creating that experience, and the fact that your world has so many different layers that your fans, your readers can now listen to it as well. I'm excited. This is a whole different level that is so much fun.
That's awesome. By the way, when am I going to see more of your stuff on Audible?
Oh my God, you should be so proud of me because I'm proud of me. I'm actually working on that right now. So book 2, Plague Unleashed, is sometime for January as well. And I'm
Awesome.
actually doing the recording for my devotionals because I decided I didn't have enough things to torture myself with. So I've recorded that as well. So yes.
You bore easily. I understand.
It's those little things in life. Let's just add more spice to our life.
Yeah. There was about a 15-minute period where I wasn't sure what to do, so I started another project, right? Like, that's how it works.
That's about right. I would like to tell you no, but I'm like, yeah, that's about right. So yes, books
Yeah,
are coming.
Like, I'll believe you. You can lie. But yeah, I'm excited, though. I cannot wait to see that stuff on Audible because, go figure, I'm legally blind. I really prefer to read when people are doing the narration.
Let's talk a little bit about that because the first thing that they send is like, oh, so he's going to read the books. Like, no, he's not. I was like, okay, because he's blind. And they left me with nothing else. I'm like, okay. There was nothing else to go but that.
It's awesome.
I figure you will explain this to us. Like, how does that work?
When one chromosome interacts with another chromosome. No,
okay, let's go that back.
We'll circle back to that later.
A little closer to now.
The irony is I actually do some voiceover work.
Ooh.
I've done sort of private project video game things, a lot of stuff for Skyrim, a few other odds and ends. The problem I run into is I've got retinitis pigmentosa. It's a fairly common eye condition. But what it really boils down to is I have big gray blotches that have gotten bigger over the years in the central vision. And the brain tries to extrapolate from the parts it can see. But as you might guess, when you're walking into things, you're probably missing some of the things in the dead center of the vision. There are things I used to do a lot of that I can't anymore. I never drove. I did a lot of heavy combat, fully armored combat for a long time. That was a lot of fun. Rolling back to the narration, for me, when I'm doing any sort of voiceover work, I'm pausing the recording mechanism, of course, reading the line, briefly committing the line to memory, then recording it until I've gotten it right, and then back to the next line and recording it and back to the next line. And that works great for dialogue or for brief blurb, a paragraph, a commercial, that kind of thing. For a long form narration, like a novella or a novel, it would take me something, I think I calculated it at exactly 654,000 years, 2 months, 3 days, and 2 hours.
My God, JP, the fact that you did the math, that's impressive. Let's let me give you points for that.
Boy, if I got you fooled.
I was like 600. I'm like hours, and then you step into years, and I was like, I would have stopped at one. Like once you hit 1 year.
Actors memorize scenes when they go on stage or get before the camera, the like. Of course they do. But the idea of memorizing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages for a long form book in order to successfully, like, if I broke it down paragraph by paragraph, it would take me forever. So I don't narrate my own stuff as much as I'd like to. Bottom line, I use, text to speech, and I do a lot of my writing using, I don't know if you're familiar with Dragon Naturally Speaking. It's a speech to text software.
Yes, I am actually. I've been researching that too.
Love, love, love. However, there are some homonym issues and homophone issues. So there are all kinds of editing challenges specific to using speech to text. Obviously wouldn't exist through the course of regular typical writing. It's made all the more fun because I'm not seeing it on the screen in the way normal people would. I'm hearing it read back to me by a text-to-speech voice. It will not always read it in such a way that I will catch that it used the wrong version of their or your, or that it'll add an past tense indicator or a possessive on the end, because it just reads it and it goes quickly. And if you don't catch it, you don't catch it. This is why editors are so important.
I completely agree. I keep telling people, as you progress in this journey, you become more comfortable. You realize, what do you need and what do you need to get your work better? I think we should always be getting better. And one of the best compliments people tell me is like, your books are getting better. I was like, oh, thank God, because I would hate for them to get stuck.
I hope I don't go in the other direction. So yeah.
Thank you. Every time people tell me that, it's like, oh my God, I like this book better. I'm like, thank God. I think I appreciate that.
That's a good thing. I mean, I hope you don't hate the first one, but yeah, I love that you love this one better.
Yeah, that is the best compliment readers can give you, especially the ones who've been on this journey with you the whole entire time and they've seen the progress.
Well, exactly. Rolling back to the transition to musician plus author now, one of the things I was very blessed and very fortunate to be able to do is I have managed to parlay my music fans, or at least a job lot of them, to roll over and start picking up the books, right? So I sort of started with a pre-existing platform, the dreaded author platform that every new author needs to build, right? I was fortunate enough to start out with something of a platform. What my existing, friends and fans and so on, weren't used to was just reading the work instead of, hitting play and listening. So it was an interesting transition, but it was a lot of fun, and I'm very fortunate it worked out.
Well, considering that your books are going to be an audiobook, then they should be slowly enjoying the merging of the two. So it will be all good.
I was lucky with Dawn of Unions. Simon Vance was kind enough to narrate the audiobook. This is a guy who absolutely did not need to narrate my book, so it was an incredibly, incredibly flattering moment when he said yes. Simon Vance is the award-winningest narrator in the history of history, right? There is no one who has won more audiobook narration awards than he. He was literally the narrator in my head as I was writing, so you really can't get better than that.
That was meant to be, because if you were hearing him narrating your books and then he actually did it, the universe came together to put that baby on.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Absolutely awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the series. Are you planning to do more, or is this just a two-book category? Okay, tell us.
There are quite literally 3 separate series that will roll one to the next to the next. My thought process on this, because this is all stuff that I've got basically mapped out. I've got the spoilers, I've seen the ending. But for me, writing's all discovery-based. The facts need to be down, the world needs to be down, who these people are need to be down, and I know the story's ultimately going to go, but it's all discovery for me. Like, it's archaeology, it's anthropology. My plan is, and the way things are laid out, is the big climactic thing that is happening to the world, which is the cycle of bones, will come to an end. Those who survive will go on to the next series, and they, plus a new cast of characters as relevant, will pick up the torch and do the next challenge, the next big thing that's happening. And the same will happen with the third. I don't know that there'll be a fourth. I know there'll be 3 separate series. The cycle is looking to be about 9 books.
I like that. Nice.
I'm excited.
Tempted to be very excited.
Because of the way I write, the process by which I write, because again, it's all sort of discovery, I'll sit down and I'll write a scene and not be entirely sure initially where within the longer form narrative this conversation is happening. So I have book 1 is done, obviously. Book 2 is now done by the time people are seeing this. As of right now, gotten something like 35, 40,000 words into book 3. Book 4 is over 100,000 words done. Book 5 is about 20,000 words done. And it's not that I'm jumping around on purpose. Like, I'm not weird jumping bean guy who can't sit still. But I'll write a scene, and as I finish the scene, I'll realize, oh, this is here. Okay, and I'll put it over in the other folder, and it'll be part of that next narrative. Probably 160, 180,000 words further down the books, further down the series, than what everybody else has already seen.
I was going to ask you what you were working on, but you already answered that question in a lot more detail. So that is awesome.
I don't know about you. This is kind of about the greatest thing in the world. This is kind of the greatest job, right? You get to play with your imaginary friends all day, put it on paper, make sure somebody edits it so it doesn't look like the initial kind of fire when you first put it on paper. And then you get to show your imaginary friends off to all of your real friends.
That is actually the best way to describe it, yeah.
Like, it's so good.
I had a question about one of my books, and I wanted to take one of my characters to hell. They had to go search hell, and I looked at my brother, like, can I take them to hell? And he's like, it's your world. You can take them anywhere you want. I was like, we're going to hell. Let's go.
Okay, we're off to hell.
That's the beauty about it, yeah. It took a minute to actually for me to commit that I was going to take them to hell. Like, my spiritual conscience had some issues deciding. I'm like, are you really going there? But hey, we got there.
Before the thing happens, you know the scene is coming. You know the events are going to happen. But you kind of don't want them to. Because you kind of like your characters and don't want to put them through it. You know it's going to be bad, but you have to write the scene. But you don't want to do it, but you gotta. Right?
I'm so with you. It is one of those journeys. Because people tend to forget that these are your babies. Like, these are your friends. And when bad things happen to your friend, you feel horrible. I had to explain to somebody, like, I wrote a scene, and it's a scene where everybody cried. I was like, it's okay. I cried too. They're like, how? I was like, I don't want to do it any more than you wanted to read that.
But you have to be honest.
It's the story.
Yeah. I am of the camp. I know not every author feels this way, but I'm of the camp that honesty is important. And while, yes, they are ink on a page, and yes, they came out of your head, and yes, for all intents and purposes, unless you want to try and tout string theory and alternate dimensions in the world, they're not real people. I get it. Fine. But you're going to explore this story as the guy or the girl who's going to write it, and you have to be honest. Because if you make it what you want it to be, then you're not being honest, and the story will suffer. That's my experience and my view on it.
It is actually one of the best way to describe it. It is all a journey of honesty and understanding. And everybody writes a little different. And I think we all have a different way of how we see the worlds we create. And sometimes we have to stick with that. So the honesty with ourselves and why we're writing is just as important as the honesty with the characters that we're taking them.
Absolutely. With drums, I'm sure, if I haven't already by the time this airs, there will be some people that politely accuse me of being specifically topical and timely with current events in the world. The book contains a great deal of, well, there's racism and bigotry and classism and sexism and slavery, and these are all things that are there. Now, let me be clear, none of them are ever touted as good because they're horrible things, right? But they exist within the world. And in order to have the good guys be good guys, they have to encounter those who aren't, right? You never want to encourage bad behavior, but you have to show it for the good guys, as it were, the protagonists, to, well, be good, right? To not be that. You have to show that norm.
You have to be able to show the good and the bad. The evil has to show. Most people forget the world is not 100% good and 100% bad. We have all different levels of everything. And in your books, you have to have that. And your good guys are not always good. Let's be honest. They're not 100%, sugar pies. So yeah,
No, not at all. How boring would that be, right?
after a while, you're like, yeah, can't connect with them.
Yeah, I've lost all connection with this person because he's too awesome. Or she. This was the plan. This was the gig. This was the story. This is the world. This was the book. And then 2020 happened. Here in the States, or there in the States, because I'm currently in UK, we've got the truth about racism, right? Everybody liked to believe we'd fixed it and it had gone away and it was over and it wasn't here anymore. And yeah, there are pockets. That guy or girl over there and this place over here, yeah, they're still bigoted and they're still racist and so on. But as a country, we're not like that anymore. It just went underground. It had for decades just gone sneaky, quiet, and pernicious, starting with, frankly, George Floyd, rest him. We started to see the truth in a more public, impossible to miss way. I could have stopped work on this book or deliberately shied away from the relevant parts of the book that are tied to that analog, that mirror what's going on. But then I wouldn't have been honest, right? I felt like I had to tell the tale that needed telling, but invariably it's going to, if it hasn't already, kind of come back to look like, look at you being topical, to use a very overused word. Look at you being woke. But you have to be honest. You have to tell the truth.
One of the things that is beautiful about writers is we have an intuitive connection with what the universe is telling you, and you have to follow that story, whether it goes any which way. And I completely relate to that question. Do you stick with the story and take the heat that comes? Or do you change it because of criticism and fear? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're hiding from.
Exactly. And it's not safe to speak, right? It's not. You're going to say things, and someone somewhere is going to be offended. Someone somewhere is going to misinterpret what you're saying. You have to do it anyway. You have to make the decision to tell the truth anyway. It sucks. It hurts. But it's necessary because nothing changes otherwise. And Jocko Willink quite rightly, and I don't know if he coined the phrase, but he quite rightly says, there's no growth in the comfort zone.
Absolutely. The only way we grow is when we stretch, when you go outside of your boundaries and become much more aware of it. I usually joke with my listeners and my readers. I'm like, I'm the girl that was supposed to be behind the cameras and making little things happen in control switches. I wasn't supposed to be doing all these things, but as
Which
the
is
world
how we have
changes.
a podcast. Because now you're behind the microphone with the control switches.
Oh, I'm so excited. It worked out really well in the end.
It's not just me that bridges multiple worlds. You do it all the time.
It works really well. I was like, this is so much fun. I get to talk to passionate writers and still be behind the camera. I'm like, life is good.
It's perfect.
So JP, who is your target audience for this book?
Wow. What I write is sort of epic military fantasy horror. It's a weird mashup, I suppose, but that's what I write. So if you're easily scared and not in a comfortable, I like scary movies kind of way, I'm not your guy. And if you want sort of watered down or unrealistic combat, I'm not your guy. And if what you're looking for is very simplified language, I'm not your guy. I need somebody, or somebody who will relate to this work if they want that level of honesty. They want the grimness of what happens when you're in a real fight. They are willing to deal with the blood when it happens. They are willing to deal with the fact that very literally anybody and everybody can die. I've had conversations with fans from 18 through 65, which is exciting and ridiculous because that's way too big a crowd with way too wide a demographic. For me, it's people who love fantasy, want that degree of realism, want to get lost in the tale they're in and in the world they're in, feel like they visited it, aren't afraid of their vocabulary, like that the thesaurus is one of their favorite dinosaurs. I gotta go out of my way to use fancy words. That's stupid. But I'm also not going to shy away from them if it's the right word, as I'm sure neither do you. You can't. Eventually, you're going to break out of other words when you're describing a thing on fire. Eventually, you'll lose easy one-syllable words, and you'll have to go with bigger, fancier ones. I have a lot of people that are active and retired military that have really jived and clicked with my work. I've had a lot of people that once played sport or did some sort of martial art or combat that really like the work. Those are sort of the people I connect with.
By the way, epic military fantasy horror is actually amazing. I'm like, that is such an incredible genre. And you say broad, I'm like, that's very specific. That's not broad. That's very much like keeps narrowing it down into itself. I was like, oh wow.
Like, it feels broad to me because it feels like it covers so much.
Only if you're thinking about it individually, but when you put them together, you have to like all those four things together in order for this to
Or
hit.
at least three. Yeah.
I am enjoying it.
One of the things that I'm lucky about, I've been a very lucky person. That's the truth of it. But for a really long time, as I kind of touched on earlier, I used to do a lot of heavy combat, a lot of sort of military melee combat, medieval style stuff. This is sword, shield, spear, full kits of armor. We're not talking about boffer LARPy weapons. We're talking about if you're not careful and you don't have the right gear on, you're going to break bone.
That's just
Yeah.
dangerous.
Whole lot of fun. The Society for Creative Anachronism, the SCA, worldwide organization, educational organization, kind of the best parts of the Middle Ages. And part of that is heavy combat. I did that up and down the eastern seaboard, out west, up north, down south. And I did it for years. And ultimately, not only was I fighting myself, but I ended up training others to do it, specifically in the big group tactic melee stuff. Like for the bigger events, we'll spend a week in Mississippi or a week in Pennsylvania, all camping out, and you'll have hundreds to, in some cases, 2,000 people per side. You completely, utterly forget that it's a game, right? Because it's not scripted. It's not choreographed. You've got your gear, you've got your weapon, everybody's got the appropriate safety gear on, that's been checked, and go.
That is
It's
impressive.
It's amazing. Can't fight anymore. I've lost too much vision, so I had to stop, which sucked. But, what are you going to do? I scratch the itch now, in part, from the books. So that level of what it is to be behind the shield wall and to be charging in the field and to have the fog of war and to have the siege engines or the archers behind you and off to one side and have to contend with that on the field and all of these other aspects, either done them or been on the field and had to deploy them and work with them and understand what they're supposed to do and how they work. And I did that for like a decade. All of that rolls back into the books, which is why, again, there's that level of sort of realism that occurs within the frenetic context of a battle.
As a former soldier, I truly appreciate that you're bringing these elements into your page because it creates that essence of what really happens. It creates the essence of what people want to hear from a perspective of the insider, because they feel it as much as you're describing it, which is beautiful.
That's it. I mean, look, you can talk about wearing fatigues and walking through a desert, but if you haven't done it, you've no idea. You can talk about taking contact from playing a video game or watching your favorite movie, but if you haven't done it, you've no idea. Right?
Absolutely. It is hard to describe what it feels like to sleep with an M16 every night. That's something that nobody can understand unless you've been there. And my parents are always traumatized. Like, oh my God. I was like, it is the things that you do. And it's amazing how much the human body and the human mind adjust to survive. And we do it every day. We take it for granted.
All the time. And we're an amazing machine. And we can handle way more stress than I think most people nowadays think. We shouldn't have to. But it's good to know that we can. I would have served. I couldn't. Go figure. I'm almost 18. I'm walking through a mall in Fort Myers, Florida. Hello, son. You ready to be all you can be? Sir, I'd love to, but you guys won't take me. Oh, no, nonsense. No, really, I'm telling you, you won't take me. Nonsense. Come over here. He brings me over. He sits me down, this poor recruiter, and he gives me the whole spiel, right? Won't let me get a word in. And I'm a guy who always gets a word in. And he would not let me get a word in.
He was committed.
So finally, what do you think? I think it sounds fantastic. But you're not going to take me. Why do you keep saying that? I'm legally blind. I saw him go pale. I could see him grow pale, like cottage cheese pale. I'm sorry, son. Let me shake your hand. I'm sorry. You have a good day now.
Oh my God. That is the experience nobody ever wants to have as a recruiter.
Yep.
He is going to have this story forever or never tell anybody. It's one or the other.
Well, both. This is a guy who had forgotten how to successfully kind of keep his head on a swivel and understand more about what's going on around him than just the instant bit he sees. What he saw was, late teens kid walking through the mall on his own who didn't look like he was afraid of his own shadow, but was alone. I was working briefly for Uncle Sam as a contractor outside of Crystal City, and post 9/11, I managed to help out one or two of the commands that were kind of dispossessed and getting moved, and that ultimately led to them trying to arrange to get me a job working for one of the alphabet soup agencies. After looking into it, I realized something that I should have already known. There was absolutely no chance I was ever going to be even adjacent to the field. There is no way any alphabet soup agency is going to hire me to do any sort of job and separately hire a shooter to keep me safe if I'm on adjacent to or near the field. So I would have been at this place, this place, this place, or this place, all the same place. I would have never gotten to do any of the stuff I wanted to do. So I ended up not taking the gig.
Yeah, your safety and the safety around you would have trumped anything else, regardless how qualified you were.
And it's the right call. It
Yes.
still sucks. It's a bitter pill, but it's the right call.
I've realized as I get older that the most passionate people that want to join the military are usually the ones that can't. And it breaks my heart.
Yeah,
It does.
I get it. I spent 6.5 years kind of doing non-denominational logistics out of Crystal City and then out of the Pentagon. And I was at least a cog in the wheel. And I got to tell you, I really enjoyed that. Met some extraordinary people and had a lot of fun doing it. But that was as close as I was reasonably going to get. So that was that.
But you still serve. Just put it this way. Every single capacity happens to serve.
Yeah.
And you thought I was kidding when I said you had an amazing background and everything comes together in such a fabulous, like, your soup is amazing. I'm like, oh, wow.
I appreciate that. But I mean, look, nobody's not like that. Like, everybody has that. We are all made up of all the different things we've done and the people we've met and the places we've gone and that one vacation we took to whatever the place, right? Like,
it is the fact that we have to enjoy it and be able to embrace it that makes it special, I think. As long as we embrace those unique things, it makes life so much better.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you have to be who you are, whoever the hell that is.
We're a little bit of everything. We're little pieces of our journey to get here.
Absolutely.
Speaking of your journey, what is one thing you have learned in the process of writing that you will want to share with a brand new author?
Brand new author. I think the most important thing is, for me at least, is you need to know who you're writing about. You need to know your characters. There are 100 ways to get to that point. You can be somebody who writes a dialogue scene between them and somebody else, sort of interviewing them as a scene just to practice and get used to who this person is. You can write a million pages about it. You can daydream about it. You can make the character in every video game you play until you kind of get a clue on who this guy or girl is. Like, whatever you do, your process is going to be different. For me, I think the most compelling stories and the ones that people connect with the best are those that involve you, the author, being absolutely sure who this person is so that you can always react as this person in the story. Does that make sense?
It does, which is interesting because mine is a little different. I usually let them tell me who they are so we can walk on this journey together. So I love the perspective of knowing who your character is. You need to have an essence of who they are so you can be true to them and be able to, I like it, react to who they are and create this magical world for people to walk through it.
I talked earlier about how everything's writing-wise is sort of either archaeology or broader anthropology for me, right? I know the story. I know who's doing what to who for how many cookies. That's all covered, more or less. There are a lot of scenes that happen I didn't see coming, which is awesome. But I have an idea of what's happening in the world, and I know who the people are. My version of writer's block isn't, I have no idea what to write. Isn't, I don't know what happens next. My writer's block is, it's reality TV. You are going to get up in the morning. You're going to hit the head. You're going to get a cup of coffee. You're going to maybe make breakfast. At some point, you'll hop in the car and drive around and do a thing. You'll make a phone call. You'll do some writing. You know what your daily schedule is, right? And this is your normal morning. For me, my writer's block is figuring out what part of your day I'm turning the cameras on. When do I flip the switch? It's not about what are you going to do today. It's about at what point in your day do we join you already in progress. That's my writer's block.
Ooh, I like that point of view. And honestly, you have so much to pull from that I can understand where do we pick up? Where do we stop? What's important? I like it.
That's it for me. This is why I say knowing who your characters are, it changes everything. Because I don't need to know every aspect of everything, but it's important to know that one of the main point of view characters from Drums, Yobam, it's important to know what he's done and what he thinks, and overall, as a man, who he is. Because if I don't know that, it's going to be really hard to get a handle on how he's reacting to a given scene or situation. It's important that I know him, so that when the new thing happens in front of him, I don't have to go, how would he think about this? How would he react? What about this other thing? Like, it prevents me from going back and finding plot holes. Because I know them, the people. So it's not so much about plot holes at that point. They kind of don't exist for me in that regard.
Your writing style is exciting. I love it. I love the fact that you're visualizing this world and picking where am I bringing my people in to see the rest of that conversation. So that is beautiful.
Everyone's different, but that's my process. And thanks.
It works. That's all that matters. It works. So JP, where can our listeners find you? Where can they find your works? Where can they find a lot more about you? Where you're at?
So you can find me at jpcorwyn.net. You can find me on Facebook at jpcorwynofficial, and everything else just /jpcorwyn. So Twitter, Instagram. You can find me on Audible, on Amazon. The hardback is out for Drums of Unrest. And because I'm Amazon exclusive for everything else, they don't do hardbacks. So I went elsewhere with that, and you can find that, Barnes & Noble and everything else too. Always /jpcorwyn, Corwyn.
That is pretty simple to find, and we can get you anywhere. So I am excited. This has been such an amazing conversation. So we're going to switch gears to my favorite part. Are you ready for a lightning round?
Oh, yeah. I'm feeling conductive.
It's easy, I promise. First thing that comes to your mind, don't think too hard about it, so let's go. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Okay. Winter or summer?
Ooh, that's tough. Winter.
Nice. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Night owl or early bird?
Both.
Really?
Yeah, really. Like, I'm a guy who wakes up and I'm ready to go whenever that is. But whether I'm staying up till stupid o'clock in the morning or I'm getting up at stupid o'clock in the morning, I'm good either way.
That's a really good combination. I like that. Rock or classical?
Again, both. Rock. Classical if I'm writing, rock any other time.
So here is our last one. Let's see how you do with this. One word that best describes you.
So I'll skip the obvious. Blind.
That's not describing you. So what's the word?
God, I don't know how to answer that. Snarky.
I like. Well, my friend, it has been such a pleasure. Do you have any closing remarks before we go?
I can't wait to do this with you again. This has been probably the most enjoyable hour I've spent. This is awesome. But no, just thank you for everything. Please tell me when the Audible comes out. I'll be following you anyway. Cannot wait to read that on Audible.
I'm so excited. It has been such a pleasure. I have so much fun. So yes, we definitely need to do it again. So your next books, you have to keep me updated. Tell me when they're coming. To our listeners, I hope you guys had as much fun as we did. Go ahead, give this podcast a like, review it, share it, invite other people to our community, and stay tuned for next week for another exciting author and Inside the Minds of Author. Bye, everyone.